My name is Cassandra Wilson, but everyone calls me Cassie. I am 34 years old, and last Tuesday my entire life changed when I checked my lottery ticket and discovered I had won $47 million. My hands shook as I stared at those six numbers that matched perfectly. After the initial shock wore off, a strange thought crossed my mind. I would tell absolutely no one about this money. You see, I have a complicated history with my family when it comes to finances. If you are watching this right now, drop a comment letting me know where you are viewing from. Before I tell you about this life-changing decision, hit like and subscribe to hear more real stories about family loyalty and betrayal that might just change how you see your own relationships. Before that fateful Tuesday, my life was painfully ordinary. I worked as an accountant at a small marketing firm in Portland, making just enough to live somewhat comfortably, but never enough to feel secure. My apartment was a modest one, bedroom on the outskirts of the city, nothing fancy, but it was mine. Every morning I would wake up at 6, make my coffee, and start my day with the persistent worry of bills and deadlines hanging over my head. The job was demanding, with 60-hour work weeks becoming the norm rather than the exception, especially during tax season. My family situation was complicated, to say the least. My parents, Gregory and Diane Wilson, divorced when I was 14 and both remarried within 2 years. My father, Gregory, a high school physics teacher, married Stephanie, a real estate agent, with expensive taste and an even more expensive lifestyle. My mother, Diane, found love with Warren, a successful business owner who had more money than my father but kept a tight grip on every penny. I have two siblings. My younger sister, Lisa, is 30 and has always been the golden child. She graduated from an Ivy League university, married a surgeon named Paul, and now lives in a beautiful house in the suburbs with their two perfect children. Then there is my older brother Jason, 36, who despite his charm and intelligence has never quite figured out his life. He bounces from job to job, relationship to relationship, and has made borrowing money from family members something of an art form. The pattern was always the same: desperate call, emotional plea, promise to pay it back, then radio silence until the next crisis. Extended family was no less complicated. My Aunt Martha, my mother's younger sister, was perhaps the only genuine person in our family circle. Despite living paycheck to paycheck as an elementary school teacher, she always found ways to show up when it mattered. She drove an ancient Honda that made alarming noises, lived in a small apartment filled with books and plants, and never complained about her circumstances. In stark contrast was my Aunt Heather, my father's older sister, who had married wealthy and never let anyone forget it. She spent holidays critiquing everyone's life choices and making backhanded comments about my career, apartment, and perpetually single status. My cousin Ryan, her son, had inherited her entitlement, but none of her financial success, and had a gambling problem that the family pretended not to notice. My history with financial assistance in the family had left me jaded. When Jason needed $5,000 for rehab 3 years ago, I emptied my modest savings account to help him, only to discover months later that he had never actually gone to treatment. When Lisa needed help with her wedding costs, I put $2,000 on my credit card that she promised to pay back after the honeymoon. 5 years later, I was still waiting. When my father needed a loan to repair his roof after a storm, I sent what I could, only to see photos of him and Stephanie vacationing in Cancun the following month. The only person who knew the full extent of these betrayals was my best friend Charlotte. We had met in college, and unlike most relationships in my life, ours had remained constant. Charlotte worked as a nurse, understood struggle, and never judged my complicated feelings about my family. She was the voice of reason when I felt myself becoming bitter, reminding me that not everyone was out to take advantage of me. At work, things were not much better. My boss Arnold had a habit of taking credit for my ideas during meetings with clients. My colleague Derek consistently left early, leaving me to pick up his slack, yet somehow always managed to get the recognition I deserved. Despite being underappreciated, I kept my head down and continued to work diligently, hoping someday it would pay off. Buying lottery tickets was my one small indulgence, a weekly ritual that my family loved to tease me about. Every Friday, I would stop at the corner store and spend $10 on tickets. My mother called it a tax on people who could not do math. My brother joked that I should just give him the money directly instead of wasting it. My father lectured me about probability and statistics. But there was something hopeful about those tickets, a tiny chance at freedom that I could not bring myself to give up, even as years passed without winning more than $20 here and there. I had dreams, of course. I wanted to travel to see places beyond the Pacific Northwest. I wanted to go back to school, maybe get a master's degree in something I was actually passionate about. I wanted to have enough savings that an unexpected car repair would not send me into a financial tailspin. But these dreams seemed increasingly distant as I approached my mid-30s, still paying off student loans and carrying a small but persistent credit card debt that never seemed to diminish despite my careful budgeting. Each month was a careful balancing act of bills, groceries, and the occasional dinner out with Charlotte. I clipped coupons, compared prices, and knew exactly which store had the best deal on everything from toilet paper to coffee. I drove a 10-year-old Corolla that made a concerning noise when it rained, but could not afford to replace it. I had mastered the art of appearing perfectly fine while constantly calculating costs in my head, wondering if I could afford to say yes to an invitation or if I needed to invent an excuse to stay home. This was my life before everything changed. Ordinary, sometimes difficult occasionally, lonely, but stable in its own way. I had no idea how a single piece of paper was about to completely upend everything I thought I knew about myself and the people I called family. The day I bought the winning ticket was actually my 34th birthday. I had just finished a particularly grueling week at work, where Arnold had once again taken credit for my financial strategy that saved a major client thousands of dollars. I stopped at Gus's Corner Market as I did every Friday, but this time with a slight variation in my routine. "Happy birthday, Cassie," Gus called out as I entered. Gus was a kind older man who had owned the store for over 30 years. He knew all his regular customers by name and always had a friendly word to share. "Thanks, Gus. The usual please, and maybe one extra for good luck," I replied, handing him $20 instead of my typical 10. "Birthday splurge, huh? Maybe today is your lucky day," he said with a wink as he handed me my tickets. Instead of my usual quick pick, I decided on a whim to choose my own numbers. I selected my birth month and day 3 and 16, my mother's birthday 12, my father's birthday 21, Martha's birthday 9, and Charlotte's birthday 30. 6 numbers that represented the most important people in my life, even those who had disappointed me. That evening, I ordered takeout from my favorite Thai restaurant, opened a bottle of wine Charlotte had given me as a birthday gift, and settled in for a quiet night alone. The lottery drawing was at 8 p.m. But I barely paid attention as I scrolled through social media, seeing posts from acquaintances enjoying far more exciting birthday celebrations than mine. At 8:30, I remembered the tickets and lazily picked up my phone to check the numbers, expecting nothing as usual. The first number matched. 3. I smiled slightly. The second matched. 16. My heart rate picked up just a bit. Third number, 12. Fourth, 21. By now my palms were sweating. Fifth number, 9. I was holding my breath. Sixth and final number, 30. I stared at my phone for what felt like an eternity. This could not be right. I must have read something wrong. I checked again and again. I turned on the television and rewound to the live drawing. I watched as each of my numbers appeared on the screen one after another. My hands shook so badly, I dropped the remote. "No way," I whispered to the empty apartment. "No way." According to the lottery website, I was the sole winner of $47 million. After taxes, it would be somewhere around 28 million. An unfathomable sum for someone who had been excited earlier that day about a 10% off coupon for laundry detergent. I did not sleep at all that night. Instead, I spent hours researching lottery winners online. What I found was disturbing. Stories of winners whose lives fell apart after their windfall. Families torn apart by greed. Friends and distant relatives appearing out of nowhere with sob stories and outstretched hands. Winners who were bankrupt within 5 years, more miserable than before they had won. One article called "The Lottery, the Quickest Path to Losing Everything You Care About." As the sun rose, I made my decision. I would claim the money, but I would tell no one. Not my parents, not my siblings, not even Charlotte, at least not right away. I needed time to process this, to make a plan to understand what this money would mean for my life before everyone else tried to tell me what to do with it. That morning, I called in sick to work for the first time in 3 years and made an appointment with Philip Montgomery, an attorney specializing in financial planning and estate law. His office was in a downtown high-rise, and as I sat in the waiting room in my ordinary clothes, clutching my purse with the winning ticket inside, I felt like an imposter. Miss Wilson Phillip greeted me, extending his hand. He was in his 50s with salt and pepper hair and kind eyes behind expensive glasses. "What can I help you with today?" I took a deep breath and placed the ticket on his desk. "I need to know how to claim this without anyone finding out it was me." His eyes widened briefly as he examined the ticket, then he nodded professionally. "I see. Well, you have come to the right place." Over the next 2 hours, Philip explained my options. In our state, lottery winners could claim prizes through trusts or legal entities that would keep their identities private. He outlined the process of setting up a blind trust, how taxes would work, and the importance of assembling a team of financial advisors to help manage such a large sum. The biggest mistake winners make, he told me, is telling too many people too quickly. Once that happens, there is no going back. I nodded, relieved that my instinct had been correct. I want to do this right. I do not want this money to ruin my life. As I left Philip's office with a folder full of documents and a list of next steps, I felt a strange mix of excitement and dread. I had more money than I had ever dreamed of, yet I could not share this life-changing news with anyone. I would be living a double life, pretending to be the same struggling accountant while secretly being a multimillionaire. Over the next 2 weeks, I worked with Philip to establish the trust claim the winnings and set up investment accounts. We created a comprehensive financial plan that would ensure I would never have to worry about money again, even if I lived to be 100. The money was real now, sitting in accounts under my control, yet my day-to-day life remained unchanged. I still went to work, still complained about bills with coworkers, still drove my old Corolla. The secrecy was starting to weigh on me. I found myself wondering about my family. Would they be happy for me if they knew? Would they respect my boundaries, or would they see me as nothing more than a walking ATM? The questions haunted me, and gradually an idea began to form. What if there was a way to find out how my family would react to my newfound wealth without actually revealing it? What if I could test their character before deciding who to share my secret with. The plan crystallized one night as I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. I would create a scenario where I needed financial help. Not a huge amount, but enough to be significant. I would approach each family member with the same story, the same request, and see who would help me without the prospect of gaining anything in return. Only then would I know who deserved to be part of my new life. The next day, I met with Philip again to ensure my finances were properly secured before proceeding with my plan. We had established a diverse investment portfolio, set up trusts for future charitable giving, and created a modest personal account that would allow me to access funds without raising suspicion. The bulk of the money was safely invested, untouchable by anyone but me. "Everything is in order," Cassandra Philip assured me, sliding a folder across his polished desk. "Your financial future is secure. You could stop working tomorrow if you wanted to." The thought was tempting, but I knew an abrupt lifestyle change would raise questions. I was not ready to answer. "I think I will stay at my job for now," I replied. "At least until I figure some things out." That evening, I invited Charlotte over for dinner. As we sat on my small balcony with glasses of wine, I decided to share part of my plan with her. I could not keep everything bottled up, and I trusted her more than anyone. "I am thinking about conducting a sort of experiment with my family," I began carefully. Charlotte raised an eyebrow. "What kind of experiment?" I took a deep breath. "I am going to tell them I lost my job and need financial help, just to see who actually cares enough to help me when I need it." Charlotte's expression shifted from curiosity to concern. "Cassie, that seems manipulative." "Why would you do that?" "Because I am tired of being the only one who helps when others need it," I said, not quite meeting her eyes. "I want to know who would be there for me if the tables were turned." "But lying to test people, that does not sound like you." Charlotte set down her wine glass. "Why not just ask them how they feel about you? Have an honest conversation." I laughed without humor. "Right, because my family is so great at honest conversations. You know how they are, Charlotte. You have seen how they treat me." "Still, this feels wrong. What are you trying to prove?" "I am not trying to prove anything," I insisted, though that was not entirely true. "I just want to know who actually cares about me versus who sees me as a resource." Charlotte shook her head. "I think you are going to hurt yourself more than anyone else with this. But I know that look in your eye. You have already made up your mind." She was right. I had spent that day crafting my story, making sure it was believable, but not so dramatic that it would raise suspicion. I would tell everyone that the marketing firm I worked for had suddenly shut down after losing its biggest clients. I would say I needed $5,000 to cover rent and medical expenses until I found a new position. It was a significant amount, but not outrageous, and certainly not beyond the means of most of my family members. I made a list of everyone I would approach: my mother Diane and stepfather Warren, my father Gregory and stepmother Stephanie, my sister Lisa and her husband Paul, my brother Jason, my Aunt Martha, my Aunt Heather, and my cousin Ryan. 10 people, all of whom had turned to me for help at some point, all of whom I had supported either financially or emotionally when they needed it. The next day, I practiced my story with Charlotte, who reluctantly agreed to help despite her misgivings. "You need to sound genuinely distressed, but not desperate," she advised, "and have specific details ready about the company closing. They might ask questions." I nodded, taking notes. "I will say the CEO had been embezzling funds, and the company is under investigation. That would explain why it happened so suddenly and why I might not get my final paycheck." "And what about your job search?" "They will ask about that." "I have been applying everywhere, but the job market is tight, especially for specialized accounting positions. I have some interviews lined up, but nothing definite yet, and my emergency fund is depleted from some recent medical tests. I had thought through every detail, creating a scenario that would elicit sympathy without raising too many questions. As I finalized my plan, I felt a twinge of guilt. Was Charlotte right? Was this manipulative and wrong? But then I remembered all the times I had emptied my savings to help these same people, often at great personal cost, and my resolve strengthened. This was not just about testing them, it was about protecting myself and my future. I made a prediction list of how I thought each person would respond. My mother would probably offer some help, but less than I needed. My father would lecture me about financial responsibility, but might send a small amount. Lisa would claim she could not help due to the kids' expenses. Jason would definitely say he had no money. Warren and Stephanie would refuse outright. Aunt Heather would judge me for my poor life choices. Cousin Ryan would promise help that would never materialize. The only person I had real hope for was Aunt Martha. Despite having the least to give, she had always been the most generous with what she had. But even with her, I tried to keep my expectations low. $5,000 was a lot of money for a public school teacher living alone. The plan was set. Over the next week, I would reach out to each family member individually, tell them the same story, and see who stepped up. Only then would I decide who deserved to know about my lottery win. Only then would I know who truly cared about me beyond what I could do for them. With a mix of anticipation and dread, I picked up my phone and made the first call. It was time to find out who my real family was. I decided to call my mother first. Diane had always prided herself on being a nurturing parent, frequently reminding us how she had sacrificed her own dreams to raise her children. If anyone would help, I thought it would be her. My hands trembled slightly as I dialed her number. She answered on the third ring, sounding distracted. "Hi, Mom," I said, intentionally, making my voice sound strained. "Cassie, is everything okay? You sound upset." I launched into my prepared story, telling her about the company suddenly closing the lost wages and my precarious financial situation. As I spoke, I could hear her breathing change, growing more concerned with each detail. "Oh, honey, that is terrible," she said when I finished. "Have you applied for unemployment? What about your emergency fund?" I explained that unemployment would take weeks to process, and that my emergency fund had been depleted by recent medical tests for some concerning symptoms. I did not specify what the symptoms were, allowing her imagination to fill in the blanks. "I hate to ask this, Mom, but I need help. About $5,000 to cover rent and medical bills until I can find something new. I promise I will pay you back as soon as I can." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Oh, Cassie, you know Warren and I just put a down payment on the lake house. We are pretty cash poor right now." Her voice took on a slightly defensive tone. "Have you asked your father, or Lisa Paul makes good money at the hospital?" I was hoping to avoid asking Dad, I said truthfully. "And Lisa has the kids and their private school tuition." "Well, let me talk to Warren and see what we can do," she said finally. "But I cannot promise anything. You know how tight he is with money, especially when it comes to, well, you know." I did know. Warren had never considered me his responsibility, making it clear from the beginning that his money was for my mother and any children they might have had together. They never did. "Sure, Mom. Just let me know as soon as you can. The rent is due next week." "I will, honey. And I am so sorry about your job. These things always work out for the best, though. Maybe this is a sign you should look at changing careers to something more stable." After hanging up, I noted her response in a journal I had started for this purpose. She had expressed concern, but immediately looked for ways to pass the responsibility to someone else. She had not outright refused, but I suspected her conversation with Warren would conveniently result in them being unable to help. The next day, I met my father Gregory for coffee. I chose a public place, thinking he might be less likely to react negatively in such a setting. "You look tired," was his greeting as I sat down across from him. I gave him a weak smile and launched into my story. His face remained impassive as I spoke, occasionally nodding or frowning at certain details. When I finished, by asking for help with the $5,000, he leaned back in his chair and crossed his arms.